Anytime I tell you, life puts on me, it captures everything around me, singing tala bingo. It's tala bingo, yeah. Anytime I tell you, life puts on me, it captures everything around me, singing tala bingo. It's tala bingo, yeah.
Welcome to another episode of Gamblers Anonymous. On this episode, we'll talk about where I was wrong in terms of Wimbledon. It was a great tournament. Djokovic ends up winning it, so the odds-on favorite wins that one. We're going to talk about All-Star Week, which is here now. Tonight we got the Home Run Derby, one of my favorite events in sports. And then we've got the All-Star Game tomorrow, one of my least favorite events in sports. I'll talk about why, but we'll talk about the odds on that. We'll also talk about a little bit of basketball where teams floundered in free agency, what teams improved their odds, what teams improved their odds and then significantly hurt themselves, or not hurt themselves, but were hurt by certain players' decisions, so we'll talk about that. And maybe we'll talk a little politics. I've been looking at it. Of course, you can bet on political odds on the next president of the United States, which is very interesting. Maybe you place a little bet on that if you're interested enough in it. So we'll look at that as well. But I do want to start on my picks from last episode, where I picked the Wimbledon tournament, and I said I like Dimitrov. I like the odds on him. Grigor Dimitrov floundered. He didn't look great in the first couple rounds, but he got by, and then in the third round was knocked out fairly easily. And it was a little surprising to me that he got knocked out this early. This young kid who's been... He was very good for the last couple of years. He's been struggling a little bit this year, and I should have seen it coming. But I thought Wimbledon, I thought grass was his type of surface, and I thought Wimbledon was his tournament to play well. I didn't necessarily think he was actually the favorite. Of course, Djokovic was the favorite, but because Dimitrov's odds were much better, I kind of liked him. But, I should have known that there's not a changing of the guard coming anytime soon, because the final was Federer and Djokovic, and 3 of the top 4 were the 3 best in the world. It was Djokovic, it was Federer, Andy Murray was also there, and of course Richard Gasquet faced Djokovic in the semifinals. Federer did a great job. He had a tremendous tournament. A lot of people actually thought he was going to win that final, but Djokovic, he's just too good when he's on his game. He's one of these players who just doesn't make any errors, and he plays really well against Federer. But one of the things he does is he plays very similar to Nadal. When Nadal was in his prime and he used to face Federer, what he does is he just makes sure to get a lot of balls back, because when Federer is playing offensive tennis, he'll usually make more mistakes than Djokovic or Nadal when they're playing at their best. So they basically just play the role of human ball machine and get the ball back, make Federer keep playing offensive shots until finally he makes the mistake. And it's not an easy game to play. It's very difficult. Otherwise we'd see more players do it. But Djokovic is right now, the best at it. So credit to him. He gets his 9th major title, his 3rd Wimbledon title. Still a long way to go to get to Federer at 17. But I think we're all rooting for Federer to get number 18 and maybe beyond at the next few tournaments. But of course, this was a great chance for it. He's probably only got a year or 2 left, honestly, to be very good, to have a chance. He'll play well at the U.S. Open, but I don't know if he can get it on a hard court, because Djokovic is great on hard courts. And so the Australian's probably out as well. That means that we'll have to wait till next year's Wimbledon and see if it can happen that year, because I think he's probably only got 1 or maybe 2 Wimbledons left, but that would be surprising if he was great 2 years from now, but that's a long way away. But it was a great tournament. It was a lot of fun to watch. A few great matches. The championship was a good match, not a great match. The first couple sets were spectacular. Federer finding a way to win that second set tiebreak was pretty incredible, but Djokovic kind of ran away with it. in the third, and then of course the fourth set. And that's kind of what you not necessarily expect, but Djokovic being the best in the world, what we've seen from him lately, when he's playing that way, nobody's beating him. So credit to Djokovic, and he deserved it. So to switch gears a little bit, I pulled up the political odds. I know I've talked about it before, and I don't want to harp on it too much. Of course, the election's a long way away. The primaries will come, and like I said, I don't want to talk about it too much. But in light of some of the recent events, yeah, Scott Walker just announced today, and he's moved up a little bit. Bernie Sanders has been making a huge run. And he's moved up. And the interesting thing is that Elizabeth Warren, who's said multiple times she's not running, is still in third on the Democratic side. And she's actually ahead of guys like Chris Christie. She's ahead of Joe Biden. She's ahead of Ted Cruz, which tells you a lot about those guys' chances. She's, of course, ahead of Donald Trump. So that tells you a lot about those guys' chances. According to Vegas, nobody thinks they have a chance. Realistically, Hillary Clinton right now has easily the best odds. Jeb Bush is up there. Marco Rubio is third. Scott Walker, as I mentioned, he just announced today, and he's got the fourth spot, about 5-1 odds. And then that's where you get Bernie Sanders, who has actually moved up a lot. He's at 8-1. And he's got to feel, I mean, if you're a Bernie Sanders fan, that's got to feel good. He's been moving up in recent polls. I don't like to talk politics too much, but he's moved up in recent polls and a lot of the New Hampshire polls and things of that nature. He's been getting huge crowds at his speaking engagements. So Bernie Sanders is very interesting, and he's one of these guys to watch. The thing is, I'm not sure if you were to make a bet on who's going to win the Democratic Party. The Democratic nominee, I think that he's got a good chance. I actually think that he would be a smart bet to make in that. But if you're betting on who's going to win the presidency, I actually think if he wins the nomination for the Democratic side, that's not a good sign for the party, because I'm not sure if a majority of the moderates in the country are ready to go that far in that far left in terms of what Bernie Sanders says and what he does. He is very progressive, and that's why he's going to get a lot of support. There's a lot of progressives in this country who like the way he moves, the way he can move this country. But there are a lot of moderates and a lot of course, conservatives who don't like that. And so I don't think that if he gets the nomination, I don't think it's a good sign for the party as a whole, the Democratic Party. But I do think that he has a chance of winning that nomination, interestingly enough. Whereas on the Republican side, most of the front runners are considered moderates. I mean, of course, there's Jeb Bush, who's kind of the Hillary Clinton of the Republican Party, very moderate. By a lot of Hillary Clinton, by a lot of progressives, is considered too conservative. Jeb Bush, by a lot of conservatives, is considered too liberal, interestingly enough. Then you've got Marco Rubio, who his biggest issue, I've mentioned it before, I'll mention it again, is whether or not he's become a good speaker. Because of course, you need to be a good politician first and foremost to win the presidency. Scott Walker, he's now fourth. I mentioned he just announced his running, and he is a likable guy in terms of personality, which is why he's number 4. And then Bernie Sanders, as I already mentioned, and then Rand Paul. I think those are the 6 people to really look for. I think Rand Paul rounds out the realistic 6 people that could be president of the United States. I think all the people from Elizabeth Warren down have virtually no chance. Chris Christie's on that list. Some people might say that he has a slight chance. I don't think so. I think if he hadn't had the whole scandal with the bridge and all that good stuff, I think he had a chance. But now I don't believe that it's his time. Maybe 4 years from now, if whoever gets elected isn't doing a good job, even then I don't see it happening. Even 8 years from now, we'll see what happens. But realistically, I don't see it happening. So everybody down from that, I'm just not even going to pay attention to. In terms of those 6, I like Rand Paul. I think that he can connect. I'm just not sure how much money he'll get. There's a lot of different issues that I'm just not sure about. I think Scott Walker is kind of a smart bet to make because he can sneak in there. Jeb Bush is the one that's going to get a lot of money pumped in, as well as Hillary Clinton, of course, for the Democrats. But I'm looking at some of the Republican nominees and who can give Hillary a run for her money. And of course, Jeb Bush is the favorite. But I think Scott Walker is probably smart money right now, just because he's kind of an unknown. If he can connect the way that a lot of people claim that he can connect on a personal level, if he can prove that he is intelligent, which can be an issue for candidates sometimes, then I think that he's got a good chance of kind of breaking that status quo. Of course, there's going to be issues on unions and that things of that nature, so we'll see what happens when it happens. But I don't want to talk too much politics. I just wanted to talk a little bit because I find the odds fascinating, and a couple of guys announced they're running, or at least Scott Walker announces his running, and I think it's an interesting thing to talk about from time to time. But from that, I want to, of course, it's All-Star week, and usually I talk baseball at the end of the show, but it's All-Star week, and the events are coming up tonight. As a matter of fact, the Home Run Derby starts at, I believe, 8 p.m. tonight, and always one of my favorite events. And it's a new format this year. I'm very interested to see how well the new format works. When they changed the format to the dunk contest in basketball, for instance, I hated it. They did like conference versus conference, and it was kind of awful, to be honest. And but I actually kind of like this change. They're doing it on a time limit. I think everybody gets about 5 minutes, and they'll give you more time if you hit a deep home run. I want to say it's 400 feet or 425. They set a certain mark for it. If you hit it beyond that mark, you get more time, which means a better chance to hit another home run. I think that's a very interesting concept, and it also gives certain guys advantages that we'll talk about. So the Home Run Derby, of course, it has its own odds. It's being played in Cincinnati, so of course there's a hometown favorite. Todd Frazier is the hometown guy, and he's actually the odds-on favorite according to Bovada Sportsbook. So that's one Vegas sportsbook. Certain sportsbooks have different odds than others, but according to this, Todd Frazier is the favorite at 9-2. I would not take that bet at all. I don't think Todd Frazier should be the favorite. I understand the home field advantage, but I don't see him winning by any stretch of the imagination. And you'll see his first round matchup's actually very difficult. We'll talk about that in a second. Albert Pujols is the second favorite. He's tied with Jock Peterson and Chris Bryant. They're all at 5-1. Prince Fielder is at Prince Fielder is also at 5-1. Then Anthony Rizzo and Josh Donaldson is at 7-1, and Manny Machado rounds it out at 9-1. I think that's interesting because Machado does have a lot of natural power, but I think his first round matchup is also very difficult, which might explain why his odds are so bad. But like I said, I don't see Frazier winning it. I've been looking down this list, and they're all. A lot of them are relatively young. Some first-time guys. So a lot of people probably like Pujols because of his experience both in the league and at the Derby. I just don't know. He does have that natural power. He's going to hit a lot out. I'm just not sure if he'll take advantage of the distance and extra time. The guy that I really like, the guy that I've been looking at and I think has a good chance of winning it because he hits really deep homers, is Jock Peterson. His distance is he's the only one who hits the ball for distance that's comparable to Giancarlo Stanton, who of course is the king of the deep home run. But Jock Peterson is the closest guy right now. He's the Dodgers' young guy. Been kind of dominating in that category of just hitting home runs, for miles. So I really like him he's at 5-1, which isn't great, but it's good enough where I'm willing to put some money down on it. In terms of matchups, he faces Manny Machado in that first round, which is actually kind of a tough matchup because I think Machado does have natural power, but Peterson is heavily favored in that matchup. And so I like him in that matchup. In terms of the other matchups, Albert Pujols faces Chris Bryant. Pujols is favored probably because of the experience factor. And I think Pujols probably wins that matchup. But in a couple of years, watch out for Chris Bryant if he enters again. I think he'll have a great chance in a couple of years. Josh Donaldson and Anthony Rizzo. Donaldson's favored. That's a tough one. I don't think either of those guys are really going to do that well in the Derby as a whole. But I'm going to say Rizzo wins that one. I actually think Donaldson has more natural power in his swing and his just in his game in general. But I kind of like. I think Anthony Rizzo is probably more of a game player. I know I'm talking. It sounds like I like Donaldson a lot better. But I think Rizzo will just find a way to get a few more out. I think Donaldson has a better chance of hitting deeper home runs, but I think Rizzo will find a way to get a couple of wall scrapers and win that matchup. Then you've got Peterson and Machado. I already told you. I think Peterson wins that matchup and wins the whole thing. And then the last one is Todd Frazier versus Prince Fielder, and that's even money. They're both even. No favorite in that one. And I just don't know. I understand the love for Todd Frazier and the hometown guy, but I think Prince Fielder, I think he'll find a way to win that matchup. A part of me hopes Frazier gets to the next round just to keep the hometown fans more interested in it, and there's a guy to root for, kind of for those fans who go and have a good time at the Derby. But I think that Fielder will find a way to win that matchup. Maybe he takes advantage of that extra time off a deep home run. But I do think that the new format's very interesting. And I actually like it because it keeps a time limit on it so that, if somebody goes crazy. Because in years past, there's guys who are hitting 25 home runs or whatever. And what it also does is it makes sure that certain guys, I think it was Josh Hamilton a couple of years ago did something like this, but they hit a ton of home runs in the first round, and then they wear out and they don't have anything left for the final round. And I think that that's what they're trying to avoid, is that a guy who dominates early doesn't get, for lack of a better word, doesn't get screwed at the end of the the tournament or at the end of the Derby in the final matchup when they just can't get balls out of the park. This limits the time that they have. This limits, but it also makes sure that if you're good, you're good. And it also, what it does is it makes sure that guys can't take 20 pitches in a row because you've got a time limit. At least I think. We'll see. We haven't seen the format yet, so maybe it's different or slightly different than what I'm thinking it'll be. But I do think that it makes it so that guys are going to swing at basically every pitch, and I think that makes it a lot more interesting. Because we'd much rather see Albert Pujols trying to hit every ball out of the park than we would see him take 25 pitches in a row just to get the perfect pitch that he loves and try to hit that one out of the park. So if it's that way, and I'm very interested to see how many guys do take pitches, just to rest for like 5 seconds, or if they'll keep swinging. I think the format's very interesting, and I think it'll work well. Maybe it'll get a few more fans back into the Derby, because I think some fans may have not loved the Derby, or you fall in love with the Derby at an early age, and you kind of fall out of love with it as time goes on. I think that a lot of fans did kind of fall out of love with the Derby for whatever reason. Similar to the slam dunk contest, I just think time kind of makes you immune to the enjoyment of it, I guess. But I think this could bring some of the enjoyment back, watching guys just swing for the fences on every single pitch. I think it'll be interesting. I told you my take. I think Peterson wins it. I think he'll win it. If you're looking for an exact matchup, who is he going to face? I think that he'll probably face... I guess I'm looking at the bracket. There's two different sides, of course. It's Rizzo, Donaldson, Fielder, and Frazier on the other side. That's kind of a weak side, so I'll say the Fielder is the one who gets there. I think it'll be Peterson versus Fielder, and Peterson will win it because of his just that natural strength, that ability, uh, and his swing. I mean, it's pretty to watch, and so I think he finds a way to win that home run derby. But I do think it'll be fun. So tune in tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern time for that. And of course, tomorrow is the main event, the actual main event of All Star week or All Star whatever you want to call it, with the American League versus the National League, and the National League is actually favored in that matchup, slightly favored over the American League. They've I think a lot of people view the National League pitching overall as just a huge edge for them. They've also got they've improved their hitting over the last couple of years. A lot of young guys. I believe there's 18 players under the age of 25 in this year's All-Star game. So I'm just looking forward to watching all of them. Mike Trout and all those guys. Mike Trout, is one of my favorite players in the league right now. Of course, Jock Peterson is that young guy that I just talked about in the Derby. Plenty more. So tune into that. Of course, I'll make my pick right now. Then I said that the National League's favored. It's it's 125 minus 125, meaning if you put 125 on it, you'll win 100. For that reason, I think I'd probably go with the American League, just because it's an all-star game. Certain guys might not take it as seriously, especially if you're a younger player. I understand that it's for home field advantage, and I think that they understand it in the back of their mind. But I still think there's a tendency for players to not play the same way that they play a regular season game, or especially a postseason game, because it's not the same atmosphere, it's not the same environment. There's a lot more joking going on. You get to enjoy it with your fellow players. I'm gonna say that the AL just finds a way to squeak it out. But it's more for the fans, quite honestly. The fact that it's for home field advantage in general is just an awful rule that needs to change. But that's something that can be talked about later on. I don't want to debate it with myself right here, but I do want to say that I'll pick the American League just because of the odds, just because the National League's favored. For that reason, I think the money's better if you put it on the AL, and I'd go with them. But it'll be fun either way. And so, then to finish up with baseball, we'll talk about kind of second half odds, or not second half, but World Series odds. We're reaching that point where we're getting to the meat of the season. Of course, we're about 90 games in for teams. We see kind of who's going to be competing for the championship and who's not. And there's some teams on the bubble, so we'll talk about that. A lot of National League teams. I'm looking at the favorites for the World Series right now, and the Cardinals, Dodgers, and Nationals are all the three favorites to win the World Series. Then you get the Royals and the Angels, a couple of AL teams. And then you get the Pirates, another NL team, and then the Yankees and the Astros and the Tigers all following up. And then after that, that's where you get the fringe teams, the teams that you're not sure about. That's where you get the Giants and the Cubs and the Orioles and a couple of other teams. So, but we're going to focus on the top, of course, who's favored, who's not. It's so tough to go against the Cardinals the way they've played, not only this year, but the last 10 years or so, they've been incredible. Give credit to the Cardinals where it's due. They've been great for however many years, and so I think people just have a tendency to just, kind of pencil them in to the NLCS, and maybe even the World Series just because of how good they are. Right now, I like the Nationals in the National League. I love their pitching. I love what they've done. They've also got the youth that I just talked about. A lot of that youth that's in the All-Star game can be attributed to them. Guys like Bryce Harper. They also made big moves in the offseason, getting Max Scherzer. So I kind of like the Nationals in the National League to get there. And of course, they'll be the favorite against whoever they face because the AL's a little bit weaker. The Royals are the heavy favorites in the AL, but I mean, who really is there to compete with them? I like the Angels because of their offense. I don't think their pitching is good enough to win the World Series, but I think that the Angels pitching is good enough to get them there, considering how good their offense is. Pujols has finally found his game again. He struggled for a couple of years there, and people didn't know if he'd ever get it back. But he's again leading the league in home runs along with his teammate Mike Trout. And so I kind of like the Angels to beat out the Royals to get to the World Series right now, if you ask me. Of course, that'll switch. I've gone back and forth all season long, depending on what I've watched. But I've kind of liked the Nationals all along. I still like the Nationals. And in the AL, I've been switching back and forth between a few teams. But other than the Angels and the Royals, there's not really many teams to buy into. The Yankees, I don't think anybody buys into their pitching, and their hitting's just not good enough to keep it going the way they have. They have a great bullpen, and I'll give them credit on that. But other than that, their team's just not good enough. Do you believe that A-Rod can continue to anchor this offense the way he has? I don't think most people do. Then you get a team like the Astros, which, the Astros historically just haven't been great. You look at the name recognition, it's just not there. Now, have they played extremely well? Absolutely. Could they keep it going and definitely get to the playoffs? Absolutely. But do I think that they can be a World Series team and a contender? I just don't see it happening. And then you get the Tigers, who are very interesting. I think at the beginning of the season, a lot of people thought that they could, with Verlander back and all that good stuff. But I'm just not sure that people see them as a World Series team anymore. I think that they have the name recognition that I said that the Astros don't. I do think that they have that, but I just don't think that the content is there. If you could combine the content, the baseball ability that the Astros have shown this year with kind of the name recognition, the star power of the Tigers, because you do need some of that star power in every sport, whether people want to admit it or not. It's kind of like in basketball with the Hawks this year. Didn't have that star power, and we saw where it got them. And, the Cavs had that star power, but they couldn't finish it off. Something like that. You do need star power, whether people want to admit it or not. So the Tigers have that, but I'm just not convinced that their team has enough there compared to some of those other teams I mentioned. So from the AL, I think that the Angels are the team to beat right now. Of course, the Royals are the favorite, but I think the Angels find a way to get there, if you ask me right now. So that's going to be my baseball take for this week. I'm sure there'll be other things to talk about next week. I'll sum it all up. Whether my home run derby picks were completely wrong or completely right, we'll talk about that. Who surprised me, who dominated, how was the new format, I'll talk about all that next week. But I do want to talk a little bit about basketball. We've got some time left. So I do want to talk about some basketball and what happened, some of the big stories, of course, and I'll tie it into the odds at the end. But, of course, the biggest story is DeAndre Jordan and his decision to first verbally agree to a deal with the Mavericks. No matter what, he was going to get max money, but he agreed to a max deal with the Mavericks. And then all of a sudden, word came out that he talked to Blake Griffin. He kind of, I think he texted Blake Griffin and told him, he wasn't sure if he made the right decision. Reportedly, a lot of Clippers, virtually a bunch of the Clippers players and Doc Rivers went to DeAndre Jordan's house, asked him whether or not he wanted to sign with them. He said, yeah, I think I made the wrong choice. They barricaded the door, apparently, according to some reports. They played cards basically all night, wouldn't let people in. Mark Cuban was frantically going around Houston trying to reach DeAndre Jordan, according to reports. Mark Cuban denies that. But either way, I'm sure Mark Cuban wanted to keep him, of course. So I'm sure he wanted to talk to him in some capacity to try to convince him to stay. But it was to no avail. At midnight, he signed the deal with the Clippers. So DeAndre Jordan is staying with the Clippers, which kind of shows how crazy the free agency period for basketball is, because you have a week where guys can verbally agree to deals, but they can't sign on the dotted line. And so if DeAndre Jordan was inked to be a Maverick, the Mavericks would instantly become one of the top 4 or 5 teams in the West, and maybe a contender for the championship. I still don't think they would have won it, of course, but they would have been a contender, and a lot of people would have been putting money on them to sneak into there, because of their because of their front court with DeAndre Jordan and Dirk Nowitzki. They probably could have added another piece once they have him. Also, I believe it's Wesley Matthews they added as well, but once they lost DeAndre Jordan, their odds went way up when they got him, and their odds plummeted in Vegas and also in my eyes as soon as they lost him. They have zero chance of winning a championship this year. In aging Dirk Nowitzki's basically all they have. They also lost Monte Ellis, and I just don't see them competing in any capacity this year. I'm not even sure they'll make the playoffs next year. I actually don't think they will, but we'll see what happens with that. But the Clippers' odds, on the other hand, if they lose him, I think that they have almost no shot. I think that they're probably the 7th seed in the West, maybe the 6th seed, and they're not competing for a championship. Certainly, they probably don't even make it out of the first round. I love Chris Paul. I think he's one of my favorite players. I think Blake Griffin's he improves year after year, and he's become kind of a second star for them. There's just, I don't know, some of those other pieces kind of rub me the wrong way. I think Jamal Crawford's a little bit overrated. There's certain things with the Clippers that I don't like, but getting him back, it solidifies that team, because without him they had no center. They had nobody. Blake Griffin was the only guy who was really a force inside 6'10" or over. But now that they have DeAndre Jordan, they have a force. They have a defensive anchor still. Of course, last year they had the Rockets beat. They should have been in the Western Conference Finals, facing off with the Warriors, and I think that they could have given the Warriors a pretty good series. But they get DeAndre Jordan back. They get the anchor inside. He's a guy who can average 14, 15 rebounds a game. We saw him consistently getting 20 rebound games, which is just incredible when you think about it. If he can add a little bit of offense to his game, he could be, the best center in the game, or at least top 3 or 4. He's already, top 3 defensive centers with Marc Gasol, but he needs to improve that offensive game to really be considered a superstar center. But he doesn't even have to. He already fits into the Clippers organization well. He fits onto their team well. He fits with Chris Paul very well. He gels with Blake Griffin. I think that team's going to continue to be good for years to come. As long as Chris Paul is good, that team will be good. And if you're a Mavericks fan, of course, you're kind of heartbroken over that decision. You don't like what he did. I'm not going to be a morality police here, a police officer here, and talk about should he have done it, shouldn't he have, was it the right thing? You verbally agree to a deal. Is it binding? Certainly not. He was within his right to do it. Change his mind. I get why it rubs some people the wrong way. At the same time, I mean, you got to get over it and you got to rebuild. I'm a Lakers fan, so I'm trying to get used to this rebuilding period. Also, it's not fun to see your team flounder and know that you're not going to be very good next year and for years to come. But it happens. It happens to everybody. It's happened to the Lakers. It's happened to the Celtics. Now it's happened to the Mavericks. It'll happen to the Cavs once LeBron's gone. And it's happened to the Cavs plenty of times before. I mean, the NBA has high turnaround, but they also have the highest percentage of dynasties. The MLB has the Yankees. The NFL, whether or not you think the Patriots, and they had the Cowboys, they had the Steelers. There's a few NFL teams, but the NBA has a lot. They've got they've got the Lakers, the Showtime Lakers. They've got Kobe and Shaq Lakers. The Bulls, of course, in the '90s. The Celtics, the great Celtics teams with Bird, and before that with Russell. A lot of great NBA dynasties, and the Spurs, whether or not you think they're a dynasty, that's a debate that can be had. But But the NBA is a fun league for that reason. You get dynasties, but you also have a decent amount of turnaround, so it's a pretty good balance. Um, but that was the big move. A lot of the other moves, of course, the Spurs solidified themselves as Western Conference favorites, in my opinion. I mean, I don't see how you can go against them. Of course, the Warriors are the defending champs, and I think myself, I personally thought that they were going to be the odds-on favorites to win it again. I just think that they're so talented and so young. But what the Spurs did is incredible, getting LaMarcus Aldridge and then getting David West to give up so much money just to be a Spur. He backs up. He can play with Tim Duncan if Duncan wants to play the 5 for a few minutes a game. He can also play with Aldridge if Aldridge can play the 5, because Aldridge is a lengthy 4 and a stretch 4. They'll mesh well together. So getting those two guys is just incredible. Of course, Aldridge was the big prize in free agency, and the Spurs won him, and that hasn't. I don't think that's really been talked about enough. Is just how great the Spurs will be next year. The best chance for other teams, the best chance for a team like the Warriors is for, Duncan to show his age and Parker to continue to. Parker wasn't who he. Parker didn't play as well as he can last season. He struggled for whatever reason, and maybe he'll have injury problems. Maybe he has injury problems, but that's the best chance for other teams in the West and in the NBA as a whole is for the Spurs to show their age. Manu's not going to be great next year. We know that. And maybe for one of their stars, either Parker or Kawhi, to get injured. Maybe that opens the door. But otherwise, I think that we're in for a Golden State Warriors, San Antonio Spurs, and Western Conference Finals. And I think that'll be one for the ages. That'll be a fun one, if and when it happens. Because I think we're all looking forward to seeing, LaMarcus Aldridge, Tim Duncan, Kawhi Leonard, Tony Parker versus, the Splash Brothers, Thompson, Curry, Iguodala, and other guys, Draymond Green, whether or not he'll stay, we know that, and Harrison Barnes, all those guys. I mean, it's a ton of star power. It'll be a great Western Conference Final, a match of the heavyweights, and I can't wait to see it if and when it happens. But it's a long way away. But yeah, I mean, the NBA right now, it feels like it's a 3-horse race, really. Who's going to win the championship? It feels like it's the Cavs, and then it feels like it's the Spurs or the Warriors. Those 3 teams really are the ones I'm looking at. The Clippers have an outside shot. The Rockets have a very, very outside shot. There's a couple of other Western Conference teams who maybe have an outside shot if Durant's completely healthy. The Thunder. There's certain teams with outside shots. But in terms of the teams with no question marks and a great chance to reach the NBA Finals and win it, those are the 3 teams you're really looking at for the upcoming season. And that's the way I see it. But that's about all we've got for this week's episode of Gamblers Anonymous. I'm glad to be back, and I hope you enjoyed everything. Next week we'll sum up everything I said this week, and we'll see where I was right and where I was wrong in terms of All-Star Week. Hopefully I can get a little NFL in there. I say that every week. I love the NFL. This is kind of the dead period for football in general, but I love talking odds for NFL. So we'll see what I can find there. And of course we'll get back to baseball. We're reaching that point in the season where it's kind of my favorite part of the season, where we reach the part where teams really start to compete for their spots in the playoffs. So we'll see how that goes. But I hope you join us next week and beyond here on Gamblers Anonymous.
Castles everything around me, singing dollar, dollar bill, y'all. Dollar, dollar bill, y'all.